much. I'm the State Director for the Convention of States here in Maryland. Obviously, if you're here, you're either looking for more information or you're familiar with what Convention of States is. We're all volunteers. I'm kind of the top of the pecking order here in Maryland, and this is a volunteer gig for me. I don't get paid. I don't get any gratification out of this, except for the fact that I think I might save the country with my little effort in this little niche of the world called Maryland. And I really do appreciate you all being here, and I thank you very much. Like I said, I'm top of the pyramid of a not a huge volunteer team here in Maryland, but a very effective one. You'll see on that sign right there, we're up to 17,000 petition signers here in Maryland. Anyone who came to this event last year, you'll remember we were approaching 14. So we've only been active in Maryland since 2014. So we're getting more petition signers, more supporters. It's growing exponentially. The volunteer team that we have in place right now is actually double the size as well. Some of you are in the room, some of you are out there leading people towards this room, and you're going to hear from some of the other volunteers here shortly. I really just wanted to thank you. Could I ask everyone, before we really kick things off and get going, to stand and we could say the pledge real quick? We have an American flag in this room, I'm pretty sure. You all good? Yeah. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. So I typically, if any of you have been to any of the briefings I do, there's many different volunteer roles, and there's all kinds of things we do to try to spread the word and grow our grassroots team. And one of the things we do is we'll go out and we do briefings at Elks Clubs or Lions Clubs or Chambers of Commerce or Ladies Republican of this XYZ county and whatnot, and we do a lot of those presentations. I do a lot of those, and I get out and do those, and I've kind of actually gotten bored with my story. I've heard myself tell it so many times at this point, and we have some really good volunteers, so I'm not going to stand up here and tell you my story as an introduction, but we're going to talk about Convention of States as well. But I think it's important that you meet some of the people that are part of the team and how effective they are and why they do what they do, which is part of the reason why you're here, and we'd also, that you've shown enough support to actually come out and be here. We're hoping that maybe we could also get you to be a volunteer on a higher level than just supporter, though we really appreciate the support, and that's fine as well. So what I'd like to do at this point, I want to point out some of the people that are in the room. We're missing some of our volunteers. We're probably out helping people. But in here right now we have Jim Benke. He's our Veterans Coalition Director. And over here we have Matt Rehberg. He's a district captain for the Annapolis area. We have, C, are you in the room?
Just stepped in.
Okay. Steve Shapiro is a new volunteer. He's kind of a hands-on, going to do whatever we ask him to do today. Julie Mason is, you might have heard from Julie if you're relatively new in the last year to 2 years. She's the person who usually picks up the phone and calls you first if you're in a district that does not have a district captain. And I can go into an explanation if you want, or we can talk amongst ourselves later, explain the different volunteer roles. But district captain is a very important one. We'd like to have one in every district, but as you know, there's 47 upper house districts in the state of Maryland, and that would be really nice if we had 47 district captains, but we don't. So if your district does not have a district captain, Julie picks up the phone and calls you when you sign a petition and welcomes you and gives you a thank you. Some more volunteers we have here. This is C. Harrison. She is our legislative liaison. She has the privilege of dealing with the legislators more than the rest of us. She gets to come to Annapolis and press flesh with them. Rub elbows. Rub elbows.
Shake hands.
I've seen them sniff your hair. Bob Betts is our grassroots coordinator. He's another volunteer that's been around as long as I haven't. And when I say as long as I have, it's not that long. I've only been state director for approximately 2 years, and I was a district captain before that.
What's my main skill? Talking people into being state directors.
Yeah, that's no, I don't want that role. Steve will do it.
Yes, you do.
Another volunteer, it's a district captain. Thomas Caruso is here. And am I missing anybody else in the room who's a volunteer? Mike Fry is back there, and Roy Queen. They are two of the seniors of the movement. They were on board before I was. I came and I met them, I guess it was 2 hearings ago. 2017? I forget now. Anyway, so that's, am I forgetting any volunteers that are in the room? So lastly, I want to introduce Monica Sellers. She is actually from National. She is not a Marylander. She is kind of like team mom. She makes sure we don't stray too far out of the beaten path, and we're doing what we're supposed to. And she makes sure she's a liaison between COS National and the Maryland team. She makes sure that we have information and stuff that we need. With all that said, that's the core team that's here in the room right now. Like I said, you don't want to hear my story. I would like to introduce Matt Rehberg, who's district captain for the Annapolis area. I guess it's District 30 and 33 you've covered?
38 for Annapolis and 33 for Annapolis County.
Gotcha. And Matt is a relatively new district captain. I'd say about a year. Really good guy, and I'm going to let you tell your story, because it is a really good story. And I will let you speak.
Sure. Thanks,
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Matt Rehberg, and I would personally like to thank you for attending our Convention of State Citizens Action Day today. First, I'd like to thank our state director, Steve Patten. He is affectionately known on our Maryland team as Clark Kent. With all that he does for Maryland, with all the phone calls and emails, with all his knowledge and experience, with his sacrifice and with his leadership, although in disguise, he truly is our Superman.
I didn't okay that part of the speech.
I would also like to thank C. Harrison, our COS Maryland Legislative Liaison, for her leadership and for coordinating this event, because it wouldn't have been a success without her at all today. Okay. So you might be thinking, who is this guy that's the keynote speaker for Convention of States Action event today? The short answer is, I'm just an ordinary citizen. Steve could have asked any number of national COS personnel to come talk. We even had a couple high-profile persona to come talk to you today. So sorry that you're not going to be able to get a fancy autograph from some celebrity. But still the question is, so why me? It's because the Convention of State Action is not about celebrities, and it's because Convention of State Action is not about the national movement. The Convention of State Action is about answering the question, who decides? And the answer to that is, we decide. We the people decide. In particular, we the people in Maryland should be deciding what's best for Maryland. I live in Crownsville, Maryland, in an area called Ardon the Severn, not too far from the intersection of Generals Highway and I-97. This means that I'm represented in Congress by Maryland Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen, and by Congressman Anthony Brown. It also means that I'm represented in the State House, the state legislature, by Senator Ed O'Reilly and delegates Heather Bagnall, Sid Sabb, and Michael Malone. How do I know all this? Google. I would like to tell you something personal, something that I've only told a few people before today. I'm almost 40 years old, and I have never voted. If this speech is a movie, this would be the scene where we have wavy lines across the screen indicating that we're going to have a flashback. So I still haven't answered the question who I am and why I'm involved with Convention of States. That bit about me having never voted, well, it's not 100% true. I did vote once. I turned 18 during my senior year in high school and voted for our Board of Education. Who did I vote for? No idea. The girl I sat next to in physics class, who I kind of liked and wanted to ask to homecoming, she had asked all her friends to vote for certain people for the Board of Ed, and I said, sure, why not? I went to the polling station, which was my old elementary school, entered the voting booth, looked down at the ballot, and I could not recognize a single name on that piece of paper. I couldn't even remember the names of the people that Eileen had asked me to vote for. So I gave it my best guess. I filled in some bubbles and irresponsibly completed the right to vote. A right granted to me by the Constitution, ensured by our founders, and defended by the millions of service members for over 200 years. After that, I had a conversation with myself, and I decided that I would never again vote uninformed. Unfortunately, instead of getting myself informed, I went off to college and joined the Navy. After graduating high school, I went to Georgia Tech to study electrical engineering, and then commissioned as an officer into the submarine force. I was assigned to a submarine on the West Coast out of San Diego, California, from which I completed 2 6-month deployments to the Western Pacific. And then at the end of my initial contract, I decided to stay and continue my service, and was assigned to a submarine in Groton, Connecticut, from where I met my wife, deployed to the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic, and then had our first child. Yes, in that order. Fast forward a few years, my wife and I had our second child, and the Navy ultimately assigned me to be a professor position at the U.S. Naval Academy, teaching fundamentals of cybersecurity and electrical engineering only a few blocks from here, which also means that there's a test at the end of my speech. And that joke never gets old. Okay. Throughout most of that time, I paid little to no attention to the news, and even less to politics, and I never voted in any election. In 2016, I started to realize that I was getting closer and closer to retirement from the Navy. With a wife and 2 daughters at home, I knew that I not only had to start thinking about my next career, but I had to really start paying attention to what was happening in the real world. So what was happening in the real world at that time? For the first time in my life, I turned on the TV not to watch a movie or a sitcom or play a video game on my PlayStation 3, but to watch the local, national, and international news. I finally started to grow up. I watched the protests and riots in Baltimore that year. I watched the events occurring in Syria and other places around the world. And yes, I watched both the Democratic and Republican debates. Through it all, I made it through most of it. I had to turn it off at some point. But through it all, I thought 2 things. First was that I was unhappy where I seemingly thought the country was heading. At the time, it was a future of uncertainty for me, but it was also a future of concern for my daughters. Second thought I had was how helpless I felt. What could I do? What could I do to influence the direction of the country and an entire population of Americans? That task seemed so daunting, I felt so insignificant. Mother Teresa once said, "We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop." I am now a registered voter in Maryland, and I plan to be informed in November. In January of 2019, so just over a year ago, or about a year ago, I learned about the Convention of States Action Movement via social media. I wasn't on social media very much, but I happened to log in and saw an advertisement that sparked my interest. I had heard the term Convention of States before and knew from high school history of all places that the states could amend the Constitution. Probably one of the few things that I remember from high school, in addition to the train wreck of homecoming that year. I clicked on the link and reviewed the information on the main website. I learned about the 3 subjects of the movement that the movement supports, namely term limits, fiscal responsibility, and federal overreach, all of which just seemed reasonable to me. I signed the online petition and agreed to have an email sent on my behalf to our state representatives, whoever they were. I didn't know at the time. I even checked the volunteer option, not really knowing what that would entail. Apparently a speech a year later. But I knew I wanted to do more for the country than just sign an online electronic petition. At the time, I was still wondering, what would I do when I retire from the military? And politics actually seems like an option. Well, how do you get involved in politics? I thought. I didn't even know if I was a Democrat or a Republican, and frankly, I didn't even know the difference at the time. Maybe this Convention of States Action Movement, with a nonpartisan political organization, was the right first step for me. Within a few days of signing that petition, I received a couple emails from state legislators. Wow, me. They responded to me. I also received a phone call from Steve Patten, the Maryland State Director for Convention of States, and he wanted me to be a district captain. And what did I say? Whoa. Let's meet and discuss first. You don't know me, and I don't know what I'm getting myself into. But sure enough, we had this conversation over a bagel, a Navy bagel, and I agreed. So the final question I promised to answer was why I'm involved in the Convention of States. And it really has to be more than it just seems reasonable, right? For my final few minutes, allow me to explain why I believe in the 3 subjects of the Convention of States. First, term limits. And it can't just be because I don't like who's in Congress. Right? It can't just be you don't like somebody at the top. So why term limits? Congress's approval rating has been above 25% only 3 times in a monthly poll since 2010. Yet 98% of congressional incumbents are re-elected. This means that rarely more than 5 or 10 seats out of 435 in the House are truly contested in any given election. As frustrating as that might sound, though, what does that mean? It means that in any given election, only a handful of districts across the entire country are deciding the direction of the country. It means that few purple states like Florida, Ohio, Michigan, or even single districts within those states are making the decisions for Maryland. The Convention of States Action Movement is about who decides. An amendment for term limits would drastically reduce, if not eliminate, what is known as congressional stagnation. George Washington had the insight and professionalism to retire from public service after 2 terms. That tradition remained until Congress passed the 22nd Amendment after FDR in 1947, limiting the number of terms for the president. maybe that same principle of limited terms should apply to other elected and appointed officials. Second, fiscal responsibility. The national debt is $23.2 trillion. Sounds like a big number, doesn't it? Let's put it in a few perspectives. With the number of taxpayers in the U.S., each person, each one of us, owes almost $190,000, the equivalent to a pretty nice Ferrari, which I wouldn't mind driving home to. Imagine for a moment you have a credit card, and over time you make the minimum payments on that card, all the while you continue using it, buying things that you need and maybe some things that you don't. Eventually you reach your spending limit, do you not? All right, so you call the bank and you do what? You ask to raise your debt ceiling, and they say, sure. Right, it's more money for them. A few iterations of this, eventually your debt, the amount of money you owe the bank increases to the point that your minimum payment does what? It exceeds your income. At that point, you're in a lot of trouble. When I was born, the national debt was under $1 trillion. In fact, it was under $900 billion. How do I know this? Well, Google. The USDebtClock.org actually has a great tracker. 40 years later, here we are at $23 trillion, and that is not a linear relationship. Where will our national debt be when my daughters are 40? Where will it be when my daughters are 10? Are there any incentives for the federal government to take action to protect our financial future? Yes, of course there are, but to them the benefits of spending outweigh the cost of budgeting, because it helps them keep their jobs, frankly. Again, Convention of States is about who decides. An amendment related to fiscal responsibility is the only way to ensure Congress truly prioritizes our financial future. Third, federal overreach. There are many examples of how each branch of the federal government has usurped the power given to it in the Constitution, either from an equal branch within the federal government or from the states. Allow me to mention just one and put it in perspective. A small farmer in Ohio decided to grow wheat on his own farm to feed his own livestock. As a result, he was fined by the federal government for exceeding the limit on wheat production. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the government. Okay? There are more details. There are things I'm leaving out. But let me summarize. Non-commerce is commerce. That doesn't seem right. Because the Ohio farmer didn't purchase his wheat, he was affecting interstate commerce. In this perspective, does anybody out there do any sort of woodworking or crochet or maybe any sort of gardening? Imagine if you were fined by the federal government because you made furniture for yourself instead of buying it. Or because you crocheted a quilt for your family instead of buying it. Or maybe because you grew some herbs for dinner that night instead of buying it. Okay? It's obviously an extreme case, right? Obviously, it's an extreme case. And there are other factors, but is it really that extreme? Is the Convention of States trying to shrink the federal government? No. No, it's not. Is the Convention of States even against the federal government? No, of course not. We're not against the federal government. Is the Convention of States trying to rewrite the Constitution? Absolutely not. We believe in the federal government has a role, a very important role in the United States. But we also believe the Constitution as written and as intended. The 10th Amendment states the powers not granted to the federal government are reserved for the states and the people. We believe that the state governments, at the will of the people, should have certain powers. An amendment to reduce federal overreach is necessary. As you now know, I'm the district captain for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County areas. I've been on board since February last year. I've called legislators and I've even received some calls back. I've written letters to legislators and I've even received some letters back. I've even met with legislators and their staffs in their offices and at events in the area. I may still be a drop in the ocean of politics, but at least I can say that I've been the keynote speaker at Citizens Action Day at the House of Delegates in the state of Maryland. And I know that I'm doing my part to make a difference for the future of our country. So if you agree with me, with anything that I've said in the last few minutes, here's my final question. What can you do? Well, first, you're here. You're taking the time out of your day when you could be doing something else. Frankly, anything else. And that means the world to us. Next, we want you to meet with your legislators face-to-face and tell them directly that you support the Convention of States Action Movement and that you strongly urge them to vote in favor of our resolution. But there's more. After today, please consider keeping the pressure on them by writing handwritten letters and calling them periodically, reminding them of your belief in our cause. Lastly, tell your friends and family what you've learned today. Have that conversation with them and encourage them to support the movement. If they agree with you, direct them to our online petition at the conventionestates.com website. If they disagree with you, then just have that civil debate and strengthen your own position. And if you're so daring, consider volunteering for the Maryland Convention of States team. We are all volunteers here with actual real lives outside of the movement. Thank you for listening to some ordinary citizens speak, and I am happy with the rest of the team. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well done, Matthew. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Where are we now